Why, hello. I have made a couple of videos that I found that by accident I thought might be good demonstrations of the kind of thinking I like to practice that I hope you might be willing to provide me with some coaching on. And I'm also asking for and offering much more than that. Something to do with creating a non-strictly academic legacy for your and, frankly, Trivers and Dawkins and Darwin's work. I almost think that the culture of thought outside of the academy can be, in fact, really is just as important ultimately as the culture of thought inside the academy. Not that the two don't ever interrelate, of course, I think Quinn's phrase I memorized was something like, it took 80 years for the ideas of Freud to trickle down into the public, and a lot of the reason he says that he wrote Ishmael for the people, so to speak, is because, not that I'm going to obsess over Quinn through this whole video, trust me, but that he wrote Ishmael for the people because his feeling was we don't have the 80 years. So yeah, that interplay. In a strange way, I think I should focus maybe more. This would be interesting if this was part of your advice, maybe. Certainly, suddenly my advice for myself is like, I speak English. I still know how to speak English. It's still part of my discipline to be able to say things in plain, normal, high school level human English that may or may not connect to highfalutin academic ideas. So I'll link some of those other videos. There's really only two I can think of where I'm kind of going into using evolutionary thinking to apply to modern society and actually think about human beings in a way that most of us kind of can't. It's very difficult. People either lack the evolutionary training, which it doesn't really require that much training, but it is a kind of mindset to get the kernel of it, the core of it, that which works persists and finds itself represented more in future generations than that which doesn't work finds itself underrepresented, and that one thing spins off. And as Dawkins pointed out in 76, it's such a philosophically immutable principle that it probably applies everywhere in the universe. And I would even add, even in other universes. Natural selection is, in its own way, more universal than the weight of a hydrogen atom, because the weight of a proton might be completely different in other universes, depending on physical law, I suppose. But the persistence of that which works and the disappearance of that which is not good at persisting sounds circular. Darwinian thinking is very close to tautological, but that's kind of the beauty of it. It's like undeniable. Is probably totally universal. Which is, of course, why even physicists have adopted the language, the evolution of, like, stellar nurseries and, the evolution of a galaxy or something like that. Obviously, big stars are very short-lived. They don't have that staying power. Not that stars reproduce. I always remember the argument from Selfish Gene about how it's very difficult to write a definition of life that excludes a candle or crystal formation in clays, but includes us. And then, deciding if viruses are alive is, of course, difficult. Okay, so all of this is some kind of attempt. I'll link the other videos. I want to provide some kind of credential. But what I'm looking for is a kind of general mentorship. I really find the things you say to be more enlightened, more interesting. I think there are, in fact, some limitations to your thinking that I think that it reminds me of a story with Chomsky, an assistant. I was reading on Quora what it was like to work with him, and someone was saying how he was brilliant and this and that, and he had all this incredible energy, and then this one time, but how he could be a little bit like a jukebox machine, and he was trying to run ideas by him, and he had this whole paper he wanted to do, and Chomsky just kept not getting it, and saying, no, that's wrong, oh, that's just wrong, I mean, do your paper, but that's just wrong thinking. And then finally, after like however many months and iterations of working with him, a light finally went on and Noam understood what he was trying to say. Now, ultimately, he still disagreed with him, but he was at least disagreeing with the right thing. And I could see that kind of thing happening if... I think it would be... It's not just an offer. I mean, it's almost like it would be almost impossible to mentor me very much and not end up learning from me, but end up thinking, asking questions you would have never asked if you hadn't met me. I won't say that I can guarantee that I'm going to teach you anything. That would be just incorrect. But I also can't say that I guarantee that I would learn incredibly profound and deep and many things from you. But I do think it's very, very highly likely. And I do think that there's a good reason to appeal to you as an ask for a form of mentorship, not responsibility. It's not like it's not like an Alcoholics Anonymous kind of mentorship. It's more just like literally, I've sought out people like Daniel Quinn, who I got to spend the day with before he died, and Chomsky, who I've had, this smattering of interactions with online, seeking out these people as mentors because, not just because of an overreaching on my part, though that's there, but to be frank, because of a lack of guidance. You look around and you just don't see. I mean, a lot of this is on me for dropping out of the academy. Like, I wanted to travel. I had a problem with authority. I decided to go see the world on my own, and I'm really glad I did. But I made some sacrifices. And just like when we met in Costco, I told you I'm recognizing now that I need to hunt up a direction for my life. And I've had the playtime, I've had the fun, I've had the freedom. I recommend it highly to anyone who wants to be a good culture critic. But, I've read Sex at Dawn, I've read Quinn, I've read Chomsky. I understand these arguments and I see the limitations. I recognized instantly that you are probably more correct than Dawkins in the points you make that I, along with him and apparently the rest of the field, had just not been seeing that we weren't seeing. And so I used to think that it was weird that I might know. I used to just assume that I was wrong. When I would recommend Selfish Gene to people and say, this is probably still one of the best explanations out there, I had no idea that it literally is still maybe the best explanation out there. I had just assumed that what you say is true could not be true. You cannot have a field that vibrant stagnate for that long. But I believe you. And I honestly think that I might be more or less accidentally, because of my total lack of formal training, good enough at some aspects of this field to be of use to it. But I need a little help. And it's not just, how to phrase things in a formal way. It's literally how to develop myself and my thinking to the point where it is disciplined enough to where it's codified enough, codified without getting calcified, that I can actually actualize, some of that potential utility. I am definitely no longer a Quinn religionist, but I do still think of him as quite a bit wiser than Chomsky, frankly. I am certainly not a Chomsky religionist, and I'm never going to be a Weinstein religionist. But I do see how you are seeing past so many other of the best thinkers in these areas. The way that you can see what's going on between, say, Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson, and see how they are both right and they are both wrong. I don't agree with you on everything, but I would like to learn from that discussion. I think that there is actually an incredibly rare opportunity for the kind of learning dialogue that I learned the definition of from Daniel Quinn. It's dialogue is when, it's not that debate is useless, it's that it has a different function than dialogue. And almost more so than the utility that I could present to you or you to me, were I to agree with you perfectly on your attitude towards civilization and tribalism, I think that the utility might be maximized precisely by the fact that we do take a different viewpoint on that, and we can both actually discuss the points open-mindedly with an evolutionary perspective. And so if any of this strikes you as interesting, and you think that if you've observed a certain lack of fulfillment in your mentoring instincts, as it were, putative, I think that I could just potentially be the student you might have never imagined you could have, because you're not teaching anymore, but if you were, you wouldn't have time for me. Evergreen can't afford to take in every hippie off the streets who wants to take some time to brush up on their evolutionary biology, or their evolutionary sociology, as the case may be. Yeah. And explore the limits, see past what's going on, the dogmas of social psychology and evolutionary psychology, and the insights, of course, too. I've read the Daniel Kahneman, I've read the Malcolm Gladwell, and yeah, a lot of these fields are, once you have a few basic principles, they're pretty transparent. Once one has established for oneself the authority to think for oneself. Just to take a silly example, there's cultural anthropology, and then there's sociology. And then there's probably 20 different fields by now that all have similar names, and it's like the only difference is in methodologies. And then, as people point out I'm going all over the place here, but maybe you can forgive a little bit. There's much as people are recognizing, like, a rule of thumb for postmodernism is, if it's called studies, maybe at least give it a second thought before you assume that it's serious study. More euphemistic convenience, what I learned from Noam was, if it has the word science in it, nobody says physics science. Nobody says math science, and that's because it's actually understood, it's uncontested, these are science. In other fields, with that word after the title, they're definitely clearly trying to assert something. Actually, I partly learned that from my ex. She said, anytime somebody tries to assert something, it's often out of an insecurity that it's not true. So, are you interested? Please feel free to let me know. All the boundaries in the world sound great. If you literally feel like you would only want to even consider trying something like a mentorship relationship, or whatever you would prefer to conceive of it as, I am an egalitarian. I don't ever perceive as people being above me in the first place. So as much as you are clearly my superior in many ways, you wouldn't have to worry about, just because I took it on as a mentee role, that I would forget my fundamental equality as a human being, with thoughts of my own that may or may not occasionally be better than yours. Who knows? You know. If you were like, I could try, 20 minutes a week or something like that, or even just one very brief kind of intro session to see if there was even a personality mesh. Heck, maybe your feelings from the meeting at Costco were just already like, yeah, I was a little uncomfortable. I consider all of that a possibility, but even if you just wanted to recommend someone, I really honestly am not just after the parts that could be assigned to. There's a lot that could be written off as ego. There's a lot of learned helplessness too. I don't know if you've seen Veritasium's video on that. It's pretty good. Learned helplessness. I'm not looking for you. I've even grown since we met, and I'm definitely no longer looking for like someone to help me become go from being an undiscovered member of the IDW to becoming some kind of personality. It's really literally, I've remembered my roots, and I've thought this for like 15 years at least. Quinn has this metaphor of just being a crowbar. You just want to be useful. It doesn't matter what you use me for, just find a use for me. I think Peterson's right about that. We're bursts of beating. Well, and I don't know if maybe men more so than women even, but human beings definitely need a job. Social organisms need to feel useful. That's what I'm asking for your help with. So that is if I'm being correctly understood, I'm pretty sure that's a win-win. It's up to you if you have time or interest, but it shouldn't sound like it isn't a win-win. You want to help the world? I believe you. And I see you patiently, you and Heather, of course, thinking ahead and beyond and beneath and above and around, and not from brilliance, just from being different, certain willingnesses, and expanding the conversation, playing a very responsible role. I see something incredibly rare that I'm appealing to, both asking for and offering. Because I think that there is so much work to be done, and it really takes all kinds, and we need some different perspectives that are not very likely to become infused into the conversation simply because they're not marketable. If I were talking to Dave Rubin saying, yeah, you should have me as a guest to expound on some ideas, I'd know that I was whistling Dixie, barking up the wrong tree. This, if you're still here after 18 minutes, maybe not, And I'm going to work on it on my own either way. So definitely not laying that on your feet. This is not a make or break thing. This is, and this is only if you really felt that need. If your own children are totally fulfilling that need, if your students, I don't know how many relationships you're still maintaining with students, are totally fulfilling that need, then that's great. But if not, this is just a chance to start something sort of like Quinn's idea of a learning circus. Just a new form of human relationship in which people freely learn and teach each other, and it just works. It just grows. It's an exponential thing, and they've got the think tanks. It's high time we started having think tanks, and not for propagandistic, neoliberal agendas like they have, but for solving the giant mess of a problem that we're in that may be exaggerated in some quarters, that maybe even I am catastrophizing too much for my Quinian influence, but that are real, that are very real, so real that Peterson acknowledges them plentifully and amply in some of his utterances. Almost seems to downplay them at others, but I don't know. I don't know about the whole on my knees in gratitude thing, but I see that he has a point. Harris has good points. I even see why people like Peterson and Harris never bring up Chomsky for some reason. It all makes sense, and I'm looking for some help sewing that together so that I can become a little more useful, not just selfishly, but primarily so that I can become more useful to me in my identity, just as Jordan says. And because I honestly